Macros are very useful if you want to repeat a particular task or command many times over. We'll just use a very basic example here. Just suppose in cell B6 here that I want to put in a sum formula, but I want to record that as a macro. To record a macro, I'll go from the Home tab at the top here to the View tab, and right at the end of the ribbon for the View tab are macros. Notice the keyboard shortcut is Alt and F8. I'll click down the arrow and go to Record Macro. I need to give my macro a name, so I'll just call this Sum Total. The thing with macro names is that you can't use spaces. Well, I could use an underscore if I wanted to separate words. I just cannot use spaces. I could assign a keyboard shortcut for this command as well. I'll come back to that later. I'm going to store the macro into this workbook, and if I wish to, I can give it a description, and I can use spaces in the description. So I'll just go OK to that, and we're ready to record our macro. As we said, we're just going to put in a sum formula here. So I'll just go back to my Home tab here and go to my order sum, and it's suggesting me B2 to B5, which is what I want, and I hit return, gives me a total of 100. Then I'll just go back to my View Macros again and stop recording. Okay, I'll just get rid of that for the moment there, so I can run the macro again. So I'll click into the cell where I want the macro to run. On my macro tab here, I'll go to View Macros. I only have one at the moment, the sum total, and I'll click Run, and it's done the sum total for me there in B6. And that's just a very simple example of using a macro. Just to test that, we'll just get rid of the sum total here again. Just clear the contents there, and let's just change a couple of numbers here. I'll change the value for north to 10 and the south to 20, let's say, and just make sure that our macro will still give us a sum total. So I'll go up to macros and I'll run the sum total macro, and the formula is there with a different result. With macros, you might want to use a relative reference. Let me just demonstrate here. At the moment we've got macros at the top here, View Macros, Record Macro, and use relative references. I'll just show you the tooltip for that. What I'm going to do is ignore that for this time, okay, and I'm going to record another macro with the default setting of an absolute reference. First of all, let's just get rid of my formula in here. So I'm ready to create another formula. And in B6, I'm going to run a macro. So I need to record a macro, and I'm not choosing relative references this time. I'll just call this average. Okay, remember I can't use spaces. I could assign a keyboard shortcut. I'll look at those later. And I could add a description. We'll just go OK to that. So I'll go to my formulas here, go to FX here. I just want a function which will give me an average, which is of course the average. So I'll just go to that one, and I'll just select the values that I want to include in the formula and hit return. And that's my average, and now I'll go back up to my macros and stop recording. Okay, so to test my macro there, I'm just going to get rid of the formula that I created in there, the average formula. I'll just put my mouse back in cell B6. I'll go up to my macros here and just view my macros. There's my average formula macro, and I'll run it now. And lo and behold, in cell B6 is the average formula with a result of 20. Now what would happen if I just undo that? Just clear the formula from there. I'll put my mouse over here in C6 and then record the go to the macros and go to view and run the formula again. Oops, we've got an error because I'm using absolute referencing, meaning that it's working out the formula for where I put the mouse, which is C6, and there cannot be any result here because the average C2 to C5, there are no values there. So we'll just undo that, get rid of the error formula here, delete that, or clear contents. So this time I'll use a macro but with relative references just to demonstrate this. So I'll hit the down arrow here and I'll choose relative references, then go back up to macros and go record macro, and we'll just call this average macro. I can use an underscore here. I could assign a keyboard shortcut key and give it a description. The macro is being stored in this workbook, we'll come to that later. Just go OK to that. Okay, so I'm in B6, I want an average formula in here. My macro is running at the moment, so I choose average, OK, as the formula. I'm just going to select the cells here and then hit return, and it gives me the value of 20, which is the average. Now I'll stop my macro here by going macro stop recording, and so. Okay, so I'll just undo what I've done there. I'll just delete my contents from that cell. Just hit my backspace there to get rid of that. Okay, now my mouse is in cell B6. That's the cell I'm selecting. So let's see what happens now when I run that macro. So I'll go to view macros, and it was one called average macro, and I'll run it. Okay, that's all fine and good. Okay, I'll just undo that by deleting the contents, backspace again. And now let's put my mouse in C6 this time and see what happens if I go to macros and then to my view macros and run the average macro. I get an error because it's referring to relative references here. To demonstrate this further, I'm just going to delete that here and we'll just create another formula. I'll use something different here to emphasize this one. So we'll go up to macros here. So up to macros here. This time I won't use relative referencing. I'll just hit the down arrow for macros there. I'm not going to hit use relative referencing. I'll go to record macro and we'll just call this minimum 2, let's say, and go OK to that. Okay, this time I'm going to create a minimum formula in here, equals min, open bracket, select the values that I want to include, close the bracket. I could have also gone to my fx function there to get the minimum function, hit return, and my minimum is 10, which is correct from the cells B2 to B5. And we'll stop the macro then. Okay, now I'll just check my macros here by going view macros. Got a few coming up here now. So I want to run the minimum 2 here. I'll just cancel this for the moment. I'll just get rid of the formula that's in there. Okay, I'm in B6, which is correct, but let's see what happens when I go to C6 this time and go to view macros and try and run the minimum 2 formula macro, and I have an answer of 0 because it's looking for the minimum of C2 to C5. If I put my mouse here and run the macro by going view macros, run minimum 2 and run that, it's because that's where I put the start of the formula. Say for example as well, if I put my mouse over here and run another macro, and let's go to view macros here, and let's go to my average macro here and run that. Again, I'm getting 0 because it's working out an average it doesn't recognize. So I'll just delete that and put my mouse back here, just delete here, and record and run my macro. Okay, average formula, will run that because it's linked into that particular cell. Hopefully this will become clearer in the next exercise we look at. Okay, I'll just try and demonstrate another example here. We'll go up to macros here, and I won't use relative references. I'll just go to record macro, and I'll just call this sum formula, and go OK to that. I'll just create a sum formula here. I'll just type equals sum, open bracket, select the cells I want, close my bracket, hit return. And that's my sum total, and now stop recording. Okay, and I wasn't using relative references that time. Okay, I'll stop recording. I'll put my mouse here into C7, go to macros, go to view macros, and one I was using was sum formula, so I'll run that. And as you can see here, it's put in a 0 here because my mouse was in cell C7. Okay, we'll just delete those and do that again with relative referencing. So I'll just clear the contents from those. Okay, put my mouse in here and we'll go to macros, use relative references this time, and record a new macro, and I'll call this macro 2 and go OK to that. So I'm recording my macro here. Okay, I'll put in a sum formula here again here, so equals sum, open bracket, select the cells that I want to include, close it off with a round bracket, hit return. Okay, and then stop my macro from running. Okay, I'll just clear the contents from there now. And just put my mouse somewhere over here, go to macros, and go to view macros. And the one I was just recording there was macro 2, and I'll run that. And you see that even though my mouse was way over here somewhere, the formula is in the correct place now. Okay, so if I want to use any of the macros again, if I use the default position, it doesn't matter where I put my mouse. I'll just get rid of that again. I'll put my mouse over here and run the macro. Okay, which was macro 2, and run. And as you can see, the macro has found the correct cell to start from. Okay, sometimes it can get a little bit untidy with macros, and if you want to delete a macro, you just select it and delete, and it'll just warn you. Okay, and it's possibly a good idea just to only keep the macros which you feel are important. I'll leave the rest in here, but you can see there that any of them can be deleted. You could edit them, but that will take you to Visual Basic, which is the programming language that puts the macros together, which unfortunately we don't cover on this training program. If you want to get into programming, then Visual Basic would be useful. So I'll just close the Visual Basic there. I'll just go back to the macros here and look at them again. As let's just say, if I look at my macro 2 here and go to options, I have an option to create a keyboard shortcut. Now, with keyboard shortcuts, you need to be careful because most of the keyboard shortcuts like Control X, Control S, Control Z are already assigned a command. So I'll use a letter which I know is not a regular keyboard shortcut, like Control and Q, for example, and go OK to that. So that means now that macro 2 has got the keyboard shortcut Control and Q assigned to it. So I'll cancel that now and just get rid of my formula here. Okay, put my mouse where it should be and then go Control and Q, like so. A point to bear in mind is that a workbook that has macros should be saved as a macro enabled workbook. If I go and try and save this now, it's going to warn me that I'm going to need to save this as a macro enabled file type. So I'll just close this window here, and it's giving me the option just to where I save it. So this is called sound light, but in the save as type here, I'm just going to hit the down arrow and go to Excel macro enabled workbook. This means that the macros will work in that workbook in future. So I'll click save to that, and I now have a macro enabled workbook. Just to test that, I'm just going to backspace and get rid of that there, and just try my keyboard shortcut, Control and Q again, and so. So if I look at my desktop here, I have saved the macro enabled workbook sound light. Notice the icon slightly different with an exclamation mark, and when I open that, it's warning me that the macros have been disabled. Obviously I know I can trust them. You should never trust macros if you don't know where they're coming from, because they could contain a virus, but I know mine is safe, so I'll enable content. Okay, and just to test that, I'll just get rid of my formula in there and go Control and Q, and my macros are working. And we'll just have one more look here at what macros can do. Let's say I want to record a macro to do some formatting and create a formula in the cell I7 to give us a net total. So I'll go to View, Macros. I'm not going to use relative references this time, but I'll just go to Record Macro. I'll just call this Format. And I could assign a keyboard shortcut key. I can't assign Control Q because that's already taken. I'll try Control and W. I could add a description if I wanted to, just go OK. So we'll do some formatting here. I'm just going to select these cells here and go to my Home tab and merge and center the title. I'll select all of these values and labels here and give them a color, like so. I'll select this row and make everything italic, bold, they already are, and red, let's say. And then I want a formula in here which is going to be equals the total, which is in G7, minus the discount, which is in H7, and then hit return, and then relative copy those down throughout the rest of the items on the invoice, and I'll deselect there, and then I'll go up to my View tab again, go to Macros and stop recording. Okay, before I can run the macro, I need to just undo everything there, so I'll just Control Z all the way through there. Okay, and then just put my mouse into any cell, doesn't matter at the moment because I'm not using relative references. I'll go to my macros, view my macros, and I've got the one called Format, and I'll run it. And lo and behold, everything has changed. And it doesn't matter how long it takes you to record the macro, it will complete all the tasks within seconds, as you can see there. Okay, and here's the exercise for this module. On the days worksheet, which is this one here. Okay, just a very basic worksheet with some labels and some values, but you can use your own if you wish to, no problem. And you need to create a macro called total days. Remember, you cannot use spaces in names. Including the macro some text formatting like bold, italic, or change the font color. Also include a sum formula or an average or a minimum if you wish. And then don't forget to stop recording. And then test your macro. If you want to assign a keyboard shortcut, certainly do that. And then finally just save your workbook as a macro enabled workbook, and you can give it any name you like there. And if you want to see the solution, how it should look, okay, let's go to solution here. Here I've just made the days of the week red, bold and italic, and I created a sum formula in cell B7. If we just go to my macros here and view macros, I have one there called total days. And then just finally to save as a macro enabled workbook, I'll cancel that there and go File and Save As. Tell it where I want to save. I'll go to the desktop here and I'll just give it a slightly different name here and tell it that it's an Excel macro enabled workbook, and then click Save. That concludes module 10, automating your work with macros. Thanks very much for watching.